Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the new Shudder film, Oddity. This movie is directed by Damian, starring Gwilym Lee and Carolyn, Bracken, and this is a movie that I had not heard about until literally last week, and I saw that it was coming out this week. And when it comes to different, horror movie studios, you have, of course, the big ones like A24 and Neon that make the really experimental, character-driven, and more, I guess, personal horror films that have a lot more deep thematic elements to them. And then you have the Blumhouses of the world that make the more, I guess, general audience type of, generic horror movies that you get like Imaginary and Night Swim. And then you have IFC Films and Shudder, which is somewhere in between those two different studios, where it is definitely more artistically driven than something like a generic, Blumhouse movie would be, but it's not as, in-depth and thematic as those, A24 and Neon movies that we get to see. And so it's a nice little middle ground where it works a little bit more so for general audiences than an A24 movie would work, but it will, be a lot better than something from Blumhouse. And so this movie is a very interesting film that I cannot wait to talk about because, I definitely have some flaws with it, but it's also an extremely well-made horror movie that will probably scare the crap out of you. And so, of course, I will be talking about spoilers for Oddity, so if you have not had a chance to go check it out in theaters or on streaming when it shows up on Shudder in a couple weeks here, definitely go check it out and then come back here and let's talk about Oddity. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it follows Carolyn, Brecken's character Darcy, whose twin sister was murdered about a year prior to the main events of this film, and she acquires this wooden doll mannequin thing that she is going to use to help unravel the mysteries of her sister's death as it relates to the other people around her sister's life. And, this is a very interesting premise. Again, I didn't know anything going into this movie besides the fact that there was a wooden mannequin at the center of this film, and even saying that is not necessarily exactly what this film is about, because there's a lot of outside elements beyond just the mannequin that is sitting at the table for the majority of this film. And it's interesting because as this film unravels, it kind of plays at first as like a standard, horror thing where you see weird things happening around this house, but as you unravel it, it becomes something like where you're rooting for, the characters to survive whatever supernatural elements is happening inside of this house to, oh, I want these supernatural elements to actually kill the people that are inside of this house. And it's a really interesting turn that this movie makes about halfway through. And so I want to break down this film in terms of the chronological order of the events in this film rather than the order that the film decides to show us these events, which means we need to get into the twists right away here. And that is to say that the Ted character, who was married to Dani before she died, was the one who orchestrated her death to begin with. He's the one who hired, I guess, his orderly to go ahead and do the murder for him. And his entire motivation was really funny to me because it was literally the fact that, he had an affair with another woman and he didn't want to be married to her anymore, but instead of just, divorcing her like a normal person would do, he wanted to have her killed because, he thought that she would never, get over him. That was his reason. He also wanted to keep his house because he knew that he spent all this money on this house and that if they went through with a divorce, she probably would have gotten the house. And so the only logical answer to solve this was essentially, murder. That's really all it is. And so as Ted is conspiring with the orderly to commit this murder, a character on the other side of this wall in this psychiatric hospital is a patient named OLIN BOOLE, who is about to be released from this hospital. He's finally going to be released after, I think, like 17 years after he apparently killed his mother in some event that we get to see flashes of in the past, and it seems like maybe he didn't kill his mother. Honestly, I feel like I missed something in there, and I don't really know the full explanation of what exactly happened in his past, but he's finally going to be set free. But he is a very unreliable narrator in terms of, this character is going to be easily, pinned for the murder of Dani's character, because he shows up at her house in the middle of the night, knocks on the door, and she's very, cautious to let him in because he's just saying that he saw somebody else go into her house while she was not looking, and he just essentially telling her that there's somebody else in there with you and you are in danger and you need to come out, or you need to let me in to look around. And it's an extremely tense sequence, especially as an opening scene, which I think that this entire, sequence, whether it's the part that we see at the beginning of the movie or the part that we see in the midpoint of the movie where we get to see, exactly what happened to Dani after this point, if you just connected all that together in one short film, I think it would have been an absolutely just horrifying and terrifying short film, because I think this is easily the best sequence in the entire film. And I think both these actors in the scene do a great job at selling the, I guess, stress of the situation, because OLIN BOOLE is trying very hard to convince her to let her in, but obviously she's not going to trust him in any way, shape, or form. And so when he decides to, run away to town and to call the police just that way, and she is left here alone because she decided not to open the door, the movie kind of cuts away from that before we get to see what her decision actually is, which is, I guess, a smart thing for this character to know at this point with the information that she has. Obviously, you're not going to let this random guy into your home who's saying that, a stranger is in her house, when essentially opening the door would be letting a stranger into her house. So I'm glad that at least this character has some smarts to her. she's not a completely dumb and useless character in a horror movie, but, when he does go away and she goes through this little camera that she had set out through our house, taking photos every once in a while in order to, like, catch some ghost that she thinks maybe is haunting this place because she has a connection with her sister, and that's why she has this camera set up. And when she's flicking through it inside of her tent, she sees that, yes, there is somebody inside of the house, and a very horrifying reveal that really got the entire audience I was with absolutely just jumping in their seats. And I think my favorite moment in this entire sequence was the fact that when he does appear at the front of her tent and, she opens it and he's just right there in front of her, and then all of a sudden it just smash cuts to him standing outside of the tent with blood just covering the entirety of the inside. And that was such a great edit to show in this film, which, is unveiled even more once you get the whole, conspiring to kill from the Tadhg character, and he says, oh, make sure that you kill her inside of this tent as to not get blood everywhere else inside of this brand new house. And he is such a cruel and messed up person. I hate him. And so we fast forward a year later to follow Darcy this time around, who is also played by Carolyn Bracken, who is a very different character than Dani was. So again, I think that Carolyn Bracken does a phenomenal job in this film playing these dual characters, and this character is much more odd. She is blind. She runs this oddity shop with all these, cursed and haunted little items around her shop that I thought was really interesting to see. And, she speaks in a lot of very vague and intriguing sentences that is definitely very odd, as the title might suggest. This character is also a medium, which makes her a perfect, type of person to run an oddity shop like this. But when her sister was murdered, she went ahead and tracked down the person that, was blamed for the murder of Dani's character, and she went over to OLIN BOOLE and murdered him. It is revealed that she went over and killed him, which is how she got, his little plastic, or I guess glass eye that he had. And when she came in contact with that, she figured out that it wasn't, this OLIN BOOLE guy who killed Dani, it was the orderly at the hospital, and that's, Ted was the one who conspired to do all these things. And so with all this guilt that she now has, she kind of came up with this plan to get back at Ted in a way that wouldn't necessarily be, just to kill Ted. That wasn't enough for her. She wanted to, reveal all these things about him and to expose him and to get him arrested for all these things that he did, and to also go after and kill the guy that was actually responsible for Dani's death, and that was the orderly guy. And again, a lot of this stuff was revealed towards the end of the movie, and so when it does play in chronological order and you see her show up at, Ted's house with his new wife, and, she's being all weird and she has this gift of this wooden mannequin, it's really set up to be, oh, something's wrong with her. She is the problem, and this, mannequin is causing all these little haunted things to happen around the house that is freaking out Ted's new wife. And she eventually, sees these visions of Dani's ghost essentially, haunting around this house. There's a really great jump scare when she's looking through her old camera and sees this video that she made inside the tent where it pans over to Ted, who was normal in one version of the clip, but then when she plays it back, it's, Dani's ghost, and it's really freaky, and she just decides to get out of there. She finds her keys in the chest and she abandons it. It essentially freaks her out to a point where when you find out that this is all, Darcy's plan to, get back at Ted, this is all just a way to get this new wife out of safety, to get her into a safe place instead of being with this really messed up Ted guy. And so, like I said at the beginning of the review, it is a really nice flip of the script to show, like, oh, you're worried about these hauntings and these ghosts, hurting these characters that we're supposed to care about, when in reality, we're kind of rooting for these hauntings and these ghosts to take out these people, or to scare this character away, or to, murder the people that are inside this house, because we're actually rooting for her, because we are actually on Darcy's side this entire time, which, again, I thought was extremely clever. And I think if you rewatch this movie, I think there are a lot of little details that you learn throughout that kind of make things make a lot more sense. And when you have this little wooden mannequin thing, there's a bunch of holes in the back of its head, and Ted's new wife is kind of looking in there to investigate what is inside of each of these holes. And there's like a lock of hair, there's a couple pictures, there's, a vial of blood. And I think this is all came from, Darcy's character in order to control the spirit that is inside of this wooden mannequin, which is really creepy. And I love all the stuff that had to do with mannequin. Every sequence where you see this thing just in the background, or you see it move slightly, or you see, this character looking inside the holes in its head, it is always unsettling, it is always creepy, and it is such a nice thing to just place in the screen. And you can know that this thing is messed up. Whatever this thing is going to do, is going to absolutely terrify you. And it's right in front of your face the entire time, and it still scares you every single time it really moves or does anything. And so once the wife is gone and Ted comes back home and sees that Darcy's like in the top floor and she's doing this weird little pray thing, and he confronts her, and she says that she knows exactly what he did, and that she's going to go after him and to kind of sell him out and do all these things. And because she is blind, she doesn't realize that he, removed this door for this trap door and placed his phone at the end of the table. And he's essentially trying to convince her that, okay, I'm going to go contact the detective that, handled this case to prove that, this OLIN BOOLE guy was really the guy that committed the murders, and that you're crazy and that you're doing all these things. and he goes away back to the mental institution to go in contact with the orderly, and he calls his phone, and when she stands up and she goes over to answer the phone, she's going to fall into this trap door. And again, this guy is so cruel and manipulative. I think the only thing I didn't like about this sequence is the fact that, we didn't see him move that trap door in the actual scene itself, and, literally 2 minutes later when he's back at the hospital and he makes a phone call, then we flash back to see him move the door. I don't think that was necessary. I think you could have just seen him move the door because you already know that he's a scumbag. You don't really need to sell the idea that's just for another 2 minutes that maybe this Darcy character is the crazy one. I think at this point, the cat's out of the bag. We know what happened now. I don't think you need to play those little trickery things, especially since it is literally like a difference of 2 minutes of screen time. But really, when Darcy does fall into the trap door, I was really upset because I was really rooting for her at this point, but it also added a lot of intensity because once the orderly comes back to this place to see if this plan worked and he sees her on the ground and she's dying, and he says that, oh, she's very much injured, she's not going to survive these wounds, it's just a matter of time before she does die. And then she goes and brings her hand up to the chest and says that line that will connect herself to this little mannequin thing, and then it stands up and it goes after this orderly guy. And again, this mannequin is absolutely horrifying. To see him slowly going after this orderly guy as she is slowly dying as well on the floor was a really intense sequence. The only thing that I was bummed about is the fact that she wanted to take out this Tadhg guy and take out this orderly guy in the way that she wanted to do, and this made it so her plan doesn't necessarily fully work because she's not able to kill this other orderly guy because she dies before she had the chance to make the mannequin squeeze his head enough to pop it. Although it was a really beautiful moment to see when she died, she's looking up at the trapdoor, and you had a scene earlier in the film with her sister looking through the trapdoor, and so the little mirrored symmetry of that entire sequence was really beautiful. But it also was heartbreaking to see her go in the way that she did, and the fact that you think that they're going to get away with it because the orderly did survive and he gets framed inside of the mental institution, and Ted says, oh, I'm just going to blame you for it all, and you're going to seem like you're crazy and you're not going to be able to get away with it, and I'm going to be able to get away and just go home and live my life as if nothing ever happened, because this guy just absolutely sucks. And he also lets free another mental institution patient who was kind of treated poorly by this orderly back previously, at least we can assume, and bites his foot off, so we can assume that the orderly died in that fashion, that Ted is going to just get away with everything, which really does suck. But of course that is not how this movie is going to end, and that Darcy is much smarter than we had seen her be smart already in this film, and she had a contingency plan. I know some people are going to think that maybe the idea that the whole package with the bell coming over to Ted's house was a sign that she did survive that entire sequence, but no, I think she did legitimately die when she died, and that she just had a backup plan in case things went wrong, that this little bell that she talked about earlier when Ted came to her Oddity shop and she said that, oh, this bell, if you ring it, this little bellboy is going to show up and kill you. The last two people that rang this bell, died because of it. And of course Ted is not going to believe her because he doesn't believe those kind of things. And so when he gets the bell in the box at his doorstep in the ending of the film, and he opens it and he's looking at it and he's very suspicious of it, but of course his little arrogant ass is going to ring the bell anyway. And again, I think that the tension sequences in this film where you're kind of looking around the house and you're looking through these doorways and you think something's going to pop up at one point of the scene and it doesn't when you think it is, and then it does when you are not expecting it. I just really loved how Damian McCarthy directed these horror sequences because they were all absolutely terrifying and chilling every time they showed like something in the background that you knew something was going to be there. And I really love the idea that they flipped the script, and now that you're rooting for these characters to die from the ghosts, you're rooting for the thing to jump out and to scare you essentially, which I thought was a very clever way to flip the script on a horror film that will make you want to be scared in a way that you also are very conflicted about as an audience member. So I loved that idea of it, and especially if I compare this movie directly to Longlegs, which came out just a week ago, which I have a video out for that here on the channel as well. I got a lot of comments on that video saying that people were not scared by that people thought that movie was funny, and they didn't understand why a lot of people thought that movie was so scary. And I love Longlegs. It's the type of impending dread that I love in horror movies that really do scare me, like Hereditary and like Midsommar and like Longlegs. Whereas this movie I think has more of the general audience type of thrills that you expect in horror movies, or at least general audience members expect from horror movies. So I think if those audience members that didn't find Longlegs all that scary watch this film instead, I think that they would find this movie to be a lot more enjoyable. And maybe they won't, maybe I'm wrong about that fact, but I just don't know. I think that this movie and Longlegs are horrifying in very different ways, which just makes the horror landscape, especially as of recently, extremely interesting, because you always get interesting horror movies every single year, and I think that these are two that came out very close together that are just really interesting movies. And again, I do think that Shudder is a very interesting film studio, or at least horror film studio, that pumps up these really interesting films that are, again, not to the level, at least for me, for A24 horror movies or Neon horror movies, but they are much more interesting than those that you'll get from the Blumhouses of the world, or the Sony Pictures, or the general, horror movies that you get out of 20th Century Studios and stuff like that. And so, yes, I do love that this movie does exist, that this movie is as interesting and as unique as it is, because it is extremely effective in its own way. That's, for me as an audience member, really did work. So those are just going to be my thoughts on Oddity. If you had a chance to check it out, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this film as well. Did you enjoy it? Did you not like it? Did you think that these characters were really dumb and frustrating? Did you also laugh a lot throughout this movie? Because there are a lot of funny moments throughout this film that I just honestly was not expecting. I think some of the way the lines were written were genuinely for jokes, and I thought they were really effective and funny in the way that they were. I thought the performances were all great, and I thought that the villain characters were all extremely, extremely frustrating in terms of how just idiotic their motivations were. But, it worked enough for this movie to make it enjoyable. So let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of Oddity, and also check out my other videos like Twisters that I just uploaded earlier today as well, which I did have a lot of fun watching that movie, which is such a great, summer blockbuster. I also reviewed, The Boys season 4. I really enjoyed that show along with The Acolyte. So I have a lot of reviews here on the channel. I'm very excited to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine next week. So definitely leave a like if you did enjoy this video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one, and I hope to see you all in my next one.